So I recently picked up the A7S III and I was torn between all the different options as sort of my all-arounder lens. I knew I wasn't gonna buy G Master given all the other much less expensive options on the market, but for me, it came down to these three lenses. The Sigma 24-70 f2.8, the Tamron 28-75 f2.8, and the Sony 24-105 f4. Since I couldn't choose one right off the bat based on the reviews that I was watching, I bought them all, tested them all, and at the end of this video, you're gonna know which one I've decided to keep and why. Let's begin with a quick overview of each lens. First, the Sigma 24-70 2.8 DG/DN Art. It currently costs about $1,100, the same price as the 24-105 from Sony. It's the heaviest of the bunch, weighing in at 835 grams or about 1.8 pounds. It sits in between the other two lenses in terms of features on the actual lens. Unlike the 24-105 from Sony, it is not stabilized, but it does have AF manual focus switch, a barrel lock, and an autofocus lock button, which I love, which the Tamron lens lacks. Next up, the Sony 24-105 f4. As previously mentioned, it does cost the same as the Sigma, but weighs in a bit less at 663 grams or about 1.5 pounds, a pound and a half. Obviously, it has the widest focal range by about 35 millimeters, but at the cost of one exposure stop. This is the only f4 lens in the bunch, meaning it will produce less bokeh or black background blur, in other words, and technically not perform as well in low light scenarios. But the question is, do these limitations matter that much when paired with the A7S III? Lastly, it's stabilized, which the other two lenses are not. And our last competitor, the Tamron 28-75 f2.8. It is the least costly and the lightest of the bunch, coming in at $800, $300 cheaper than the other options, weighing just 550 grams or 1.2 pounds. It's 5 millimeters tighter on the, for lack of better words, zoomy end than the Sigma, and unfortunately 4 millimeters tighter on the wide end, and we'll get into my thoughts on that later. You really can't go wrong with any of these lenses right here. They're all very sharp and produce an amazing image. I just wanted to figure out which one would be the absolute best for me if I'm spending $1,000 for a piece of gear. Now, in the rest of the video, I'm gonna break down what I like and don't like when it comes to their focal ranges, since they're all a little bit different, their low light performance and bokeh, weight, overall feel and build quality, and autofocus abilities. Just a super quick disclaimer before we dive right in. These are just my own opinions for my style of shooting. Yours might be different, as we all have different needs, different shooting styles, and that is just fine. If you disagree or have something to add that I don't mention about these lenses, I'd love to hear from you. Drop those respectful comments down below. All right, let's jump right in. Let's talk about these three focal lengths really quick. So starting with the 24-105 f4. I think this is a great all-around run and gun lens because of that extra 104 you get versus the 70 and the 75 on the other two lenses. I've used this lens quite a lot. I've used it on the A7 III, and it was my go-to lens for that camera. It definitely doesn't give you that much more reach than the 70 and 75 millimeter of the other lenses, so I don't think that's a huge deal, but it definitely is nice to be able to have that reach if you're trying to get something really up close. Like I just saw a squirrel run by. I missed the shot, but it would have been cool to zoom in and get a close-up shot of that squirrel. That extra reach is nice, especially on the A7S III, because now, as someone coming from the A7 III, we can't punch in, we can't crop in on the sensor and maintain 4K like I used to be able to. So now that has to happen in the lens. That can't happen in the body, in the sensor. So if you're someone that really does need that extra reach, 24-105 is a really nice focal range. I wish the Tamron could have just mimicked the 24-70 the Sigma has. I don't know how that works with industry. They probably have to differentiate, not completely copy each other, but if they could and the Tamron had that same 24-70 focal range, or even a 24-105 2.8, that would be a completely different story. I'm just holding the camera right now, have my arm all the way extended out. This is 28 millimeters on the Tamron, and then this is 24 millimeters on the Sigma. And even though you get a little bit of a wider focal range for vlogging, my arm is getting tired quickly, and that's kind of resulting in shakier footage than the Tamron, so give and take. So now, the Sigma 24-70. Out of the 3 focal ranges, after doing some testing, this one's probably my favorite. I kind of thought it would be the 24-105, but the difference between 70mm and 105 actually isn't as much as I thought it would be. I would prefer having the 2.8 and then sacrificing those extra 30 or so millimeters over the f4. It's just not a huge difference for me. Compared to the Tamron, I do lose those 5 extra millimeters on the tight end, but then I gain 5 millimeters on the wide end, making vlogging much more possible with this lens. And the Sigma 24-70 would not be my first vlogging lens just because it is so heavy and it's really not that wide. I'd probably want to look more into the Tamron. I believe it's 17-28. That'd probably be a much better lens for vlogging, but the 24-70 is an amazing focal range on a full frame sensor for running and gunning, getting wide shots, and then also punching in and getting tight shots. It's super useful. On to Lowlight performance, and this is a tricky one. Upon ordering the 24-105 f4 by Sony, I didn't think the Lowlight would be an issue at all given how good it is on the A7S III. However, after using the A7S III for some time now, I realized something. At the dual native ISOs of 640 and 12,800, the image is very clean, but it actually doesn't perform as good as I thought it would between those ISO ranges. When it started to get dark, I had to bump up the ISO on the 24-105, but could leave it at 640 when shooting at f2.8 on the Sigma in the Tamron. So with that being said, not gonna lie, having the f2.8 even on the amazing low light beast that the A7S III is, I actually really enjoyed having that extra stop of exposure. Didn't think it would be a huge deal, but it actually kind of was. On to bokeh, my favorite word in the entire world, aka that blurry background you see behind what's in focus. Now, to give you some context, coming from the Panasonic GH5, a micro four thirds camera with a tiny sensor and significantly less bokeh than a full frame provides, I figured f4 would be just fine for me. When you're shooting at f4 on a full frame, that's equivalent to shooting at f2 on the micro four thirds sensor that I'm used to, and I used to shoot from f1.8 to f2.8 all the time on that camera and was pretty happy with those results. So essentially the only option I had on that system with the lens I was using, the Sigma 18-35, I was basically shooting at f4 all the time. But after doing some tests comparing the 2.8 to 4 on the Sigma in the Tamron versus the Sony 24-105 lens, I think I got a taste of the good life. That f2.8 does look super creamy. I have to zoom in with the f4 to get some nice compression and to give it that good bokeh like the 2.8 offers. So between the Lowlight and the bokeh, it was pretty clear to me that I preferred f2.8 over f4 on the A7S III. True story, I was just on a client shoot with the Sigma 24-70 2.8 and the Sony A7S III, and the client was getting super stoked on the bokeh of the photos I was shooting. Of course, they didn't know what that word was or what the blurry background they were looking at even meant, but they just kept talking about how nice it was making the photos look. So the 2.8 is already paying off. However, in the next section, you will see why I prefer the 24-105 f4 from Sony. But before I jump into that, I want to compare the actual look of the bokeh that comes out of the Tamron and the Sigma. Now, after doing some tests, they look very similar. They both look super nice. I personally think the Sigma has a slight edge, but I'll let you be the judge. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Let's just say that bokeh is not going to be the deciding factor between these lenses for me. They're both great. You ever go out to shoot and then get to where you're shooting and then realize you forgot your battery on the charger? That's what happened today.
Look how pretty the leaves are falling.
Very, very pretty. So which lens feels the best in your hands when you're actually shooting with it? Let's talk about the weight of these lenses a little bit. So far, the 24-105 has by far been my favorite. I think the Tamron is just a little bit too light and almost feels kind of cheap when you're shooting with it. And then the Sigma 24-70 is a tank. It's super heavy. Before we move on to the next section, I want to note that heaviness can be good too, and in fact, I actually like it. I will be rigging out the Sony A7S III when I'm shooting video. I am using a small rig handheld system, and when you're shooting handheld footage, you actually want weight on your camera to give it that natural, good cinematic handheld look without getting a ton of micro jitters if your setup is too light. So for certain things, yes, I do want a lighter lens like gimbal work, but when I'm shooting handheld, I want a heavier rig, so it's kind of hard to say which one I prefer. I want to talk a little bit about the build quality of these lenses, how these lenses feel when you're using them, and it's actually kind of straightforward. The Tamron feels pretty cheap and plasticky, although it's not the absolute worst. I can deal with it. The Sigma feels most like the G Master. The 24-105 also feels extremely well built, like a really solid piece of glass, but I think I prefer the Sigma a little bit more, literally because the little rubber here on the zoom and focus rings stand up a little bit more, they pop out a little bit more, and I have an easier time kind of grabbing them on the go. My fingers don't slip. Now that's super petty, that's so minimal, but I thought I'd mention it. Now let's talk about focus, and not so much autofocus, because the autofocus on all three of these lenses is incredible. What I do want to talk mainly about is the minimum focal distance between these lenses and how they differ. The minimum focal distance on both the Sigma and the Tamron is very, very good. It's super impressive. Now it's not so good on the 24-105. The minimum focusing distance is 1.25 feet, 1.25 feet on the 24-105, and then 0.59 feet on the Sigma and 0.62 on the Tamron. So the Sigma and the Tamron are very similar. You can get so close to things and have them still be in focus, almost macro-like shots. I love this for vlogging, getting really close up to the camera, getting those tight, intimate shots. And the bokeh, of course, just falls right off your face and looks so good on both these lenses. All right, let's start wrapping things up. The question of the day that everyone wants to know is, which one of these three lenses am I going to keep? For me, it definitely comes down to the Sigma and the Tamron, which I'm actually kind of surprised by. I loved using the 24-105 from Sony, the f4 on the A7 III I used to shoot with, but maybe it's just because I didn't get my hands on either of these other two lenses. Again, the 24-105 is still an awesome lens, especially if you feel like you really need that extra range the lens provides. If that's you, hey, no hard feelings. I'm opting out mainly due to the f4 and the poor minimum focal distance, the focus range that we just talked about. It has not a thing to do with the sharpness, the build quality, or the autofocus of the lens. So now that we have it down to two lenses, which one is it gonna be? I literally was losing sleep over this. I could not decide between one or the other. Yes, both lenses have their pros and their cons, but I was trying to figure out which pros would be most important for my style of shooting, the things that I am trying to create. After a ton of thought and some lost sleep, I am going to stick with the Sigma 24-70 f2.8, and here is why. Number one, it's all the buttons that you get physically on the lens. You literally get nothing with the Tamron. I do a ton of run and gun style shooting, so if I need to flip between autofocus and manual focus super quick, or I need to lock focus on a subject, I need to be able to do that without thinking. I need to be able to do that super quick. And there's just sort of an extra step added to be able to do those things with the Tamron. On the other side, you could argue that because I'm a run and gun filmmaker, the Tamron will be better because it's lighter. But again, I like the weight that the Sigma has, especially for handheld shooting. I think the footage looks less shaky, more cinematic. So that is reason number two why I like the Sigma, is actually because of the weight. It produces better looking handheld footage, and I just like shooting with a camera rig that's got some beef, that's a little bit heavier, that just feels more professional in the hands. And by now you can tell my decision really was not based on sharpness or image quality or vignetting from either of these two lenses, because they're both phenomenal. It came down more to personal preference, build quality, things like that. And don't dismiss those things when you're looking for a lens. Don't just look at the spec sheet, the weight, those kind of things. Take all those things into consideration and make a decision what you feel is going to be best for you. Now, the Tamron is probably going to be better for you if, for example, you do a ton of gimbal work, at least with the Ronin S. I don't know if that's been improved with the Ronin S2. I believe those motors are stronger, but I use the Ronin S, and if you are going to be using your camera on a Ronin 100% of the time or 80% of the time, a lot, then you might want to look at the Tamron, because I do have a hard time balancing the Sigma 24-70 on my Ronin S. I don't use a gimbal all that much. I'm probably handheld 80% of the time and then gimbal 20% of the time, so I can deal with it for that 20% of the time. You might also consider the Tamron if you want to save a little bit of money. It's about $300 cheaper than the other lenses, and at the end of the day, it really does produce the same image as the Sigma. But again, for me, having those added features at my fingertips while I'm running and gunning is kind of invaluable to me. That is well worth over the $300 price difference, but that's just me. And we are all done. I hope this video helped you save some time, some money, some effort, not having to test out all 3 lenses like I did if you're in the market for them. If that's you and you enjoyed this video, it helped you decide on one of these 3 lenses. If you're in the market, give this video a thumbs up, leave any comments down below, and I'll get right back to you. Questions, if you have anything to add like I mentioned earlier that I might have missed, go ahead and do that. If you enjoyed this video, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button. I would really highly appreciate it. You'll be able to see my videos that come next, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.